Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the online public affairs program that goes beyond the headlines and sound bites and brings you all the issues facing Indiana. It's in its entirety. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Today on Indiana Issues, we've got less than 60 days and some change until Election Day, so we'll take a look at Indiana's political climate. Joining us are panel of political pundits, Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Kip Tew, Eric Berman, political reporter for Network Indiana and WIBC Radio, and Republican Joey Fox. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for being with us today. Good to have you here.
Thanks.
Good to be here. Well, let's go ahead and get started. New poll numbers out in the U.S. Senate race. Of course, obviously one of the most watched races in the entire country. We got some of the numbers up there, so I want you guys to follow along. You've got the latest poll by NBC News and Marist gives Joe Donnelly a 6-point lead over Mike Braun in a two-way race amongst likely voters. But when you add Libertarian Lucy Brendan to it, that number drops to just a 3-point lead, 44, 41, and 8. And that poll, like I said, margin of error of about plus or minus 5%. Now, this is a lot closer margin than the Gravis poll that was done late last month. That poll taken back in May, gave Mike Braun a 1-point lead over Joe Donnelly. And then we have the Trafalgar poll, which is a Republican-leaning poll, that gave Joe Donnelly a 12-point lead, if everybody can still follow along at home here, 51 to 39. But when you take all these polls in average, at least a two-way race, Donnelly 48, Braun 40. So we'll start with you, Kip Tew. Is any of this believable, or is it just still way too early?
Well, I think the snapshots are probably pretty good. I don't know for sure, but I would guess the NBC poll is probably fairly accurate. I don't know why they do a two-way head-to-head when there's three people in the race, and I think that offends you.
Amen, brother.
But the fact of the matter is, there's three people in the race, and there'll be three people on the ballot, so that's the one that ought to matter because that's what's really going to happen. So, I think I've thought all along it's going to be a close race. I've thought all along it's Joe Donnelly's to lose, and he's in the lead. So I'm not surprised by it.
Joey Fox, Donald Trump won Indiana by 20 points and some change. What does it tell you that a Senate race is this close?
Well, I was going to say the thing that struck me most in this poll are the president's approval-disapproval numbers. I mean, he's at, 48, 46, something like that. I mean, that is a huge drop, and that's among likely voters in a midterm. So, I mean, I think that is a huge drop. I think that's a real problem for my side of the aisle when we're doing that. This election, unfortunately, has not been largely about issues and ideas and policy. This has been what's the song, right? It's all about the bass on both sides. There's not a lot of
trouble.
Yeah. There's thank you.
There's a lot of trouble, but
there's no trouble. Exactly.
Right. There's not a lot of reaching across the aisle, right, to try and build a coalition.
Well,
here.
I don't know if I agree with that part of it. I certainly believe that Donnelly has done quite a bit of outreach to the other side in at least his television commercials.
Brad, let me get you to jump in here because Kip made, like I said, a very salient point. There are three people in the race, so why not poll all three? There was some literature out there that was saying, will the Libertarians be, quote unquote, the spoiler in this election and make it possible to have Joe Donnelly reelected to the Senate because those are votes that would probably go to Mike Braun?
I'm sorry, the Libertarians have been on the ballot for 30 years. We're not spoilers. We are a party that has candidates, and we're growing. Why somebody would do a poll that excludes one of the three candidates that's going to appear on the ballot, it automatically makes that an invalid poll because you're not using all the statistics. I don't know why somebody would pay for that. It's nice to see that Lucy's at 8%. It would be nicer if she was at 16, but we'll take what we can get right now. I'm baffled by the methodology of the polls. I do think it's good that at 8%, I think that's a little bit better than she did 2 years ago when she ran. So those are looking good. And I agree with Kip on this, that Donnelly, his commercials in most other states would sound like a right-leaning Republican. And that seems to be where he's running. So his people know that's the base he's going after, and it seems to be paying off.
If only that were true.
Is that the base, Eric, that Joe Donnelly's going after, or is it just more of the maybe sort of mitigating, not giving those folks a reason to come out and vote against him?
Well, I mean, it's no secret Indiana is a red state. If you're a Democrat seeking statewide office in Indiana, you've got to be able to reach across the center line and get some of those Republican votes. That's what he's trying to do both in the campaign and in the campaign ads. As our friend Brian Vargas would say, it's a long way to the election, but right now I assume that's a happy campaign.
Brian Vargas, there's a blast from the past. I take issue with Indiana as a red state, so I disagree with Eric with respect to that. I think we're light purple to pink rather than a red state. Definitely, 2008 we elected a Democratic president in Indiana. We've had 2 Democratic senators. We've had 16 years of Democratic governors in the past. So we're not a state that is reflexively Republican. On the national level, almost all the time we vote for a Republican president, but we're not a deep red state.
And the Republican Party controls everything in the state house.
Let me ask you this, Kip, though.
Currently, that's true.
Because one of the things that has popped up in the Joe Donnelly's approach, like say, reaching out to maybe some of those more moderate Republican voters, is that he may be sort of having issues with his more progressive wing. I remember the questions about supporting Donald Trump on the wall, issues about Neil Gorsuch, and then what will happen? Will he or really won't vote for Judge Kavanaugh? You're in touch with the progressive wing of your party. Do those folks stay home? Do they come out, or do they just sort of hold their nose, saying, "Hey, I may not be crazy about all of Joe and his positions, but he gets me a lot. I'm a lot closer to him than I am to a Mike Braun."
I think he is right on the edge on that right at the moment, and I think that a lot of people don't agree with me on what I'm about to say. But if Joe Donnelly votes for Judge Kavanaugh, I think he imperils his reelection. And follow me for a moment. That is that the base of the Republican Party is going to vote for Mike Braun no matter what. The independents out there who haven't made up their mind who they're going to vote for and where the elections always get decided, their issue is not who the next Supreme Court justice is. They're not voting based upon who's going to vote for that. The Democrats, on the other hand, if Kavanaugh is on the Supreme Court and Joe Donnelly helped put him on there, that might be enough for a certain percentage of those progressives to say, I'm not voting for him. I'm just going to leave it blank. So he's on the razor's edge there, I believe, and I think he endangers himself from winning re-election if he votes for Kavanaugh.
See, and I guess I argue that he loses more folks in the middle than maybe you're thinking of. And kind of in my analysis, I think there are more folks in the middle that do care a lot about issues that would come before the Supreme Court, like abortion, like the Second Amendment. Right? They may not be kind of the more rabid folks on the farther side of my party, but they do care about those issues, and those are easy issues to turn folks out with. So I don't know that I agree. I respect your analysis. I just don't know that I agree.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the $24,000 question, I suppose, as to what that is. And both sides are looking at polling. But my guess is that the Republicans are going to support the Republican. And those issues you're talking about when it comes to abortion or labor rights or those types of things, they're going to vote for Braun because they know he's going to be reliable for them.
You're watching Indiana Issues, an online public affairs program. We talk about the big issues facing Indiana. Our guests today are Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Kip Tew, Eric Berman, WIBC Radio, and, of course, our good friend Joey Fox, Republican. Donald Trump, gentlemen, speaking of the president.
Who's he?
Came to Indiana to campaign for Mike Braun in Evansville last week. Record attendance at the Ford Center in Evansville. Like I said,
Biggest ever, probably, right?
Biggest ever. I mean, he even beat WrestleMania. So people call over the Midwest, 5 days notice. Question, does this show, and Joey, we'll start with you, that the Trump base is energized, or will these people actually come out and vote? Because it's one thing to come out and see the president. It's another thing to actually go out and vote 30, 60 days later.
I believe that they will. Here's the thing, right? But he has, the president seems to have in national polling at least he has a high floor and a low ceiling, right, on his approval, and the people that support him really support him. Now, we're going to test that theory out in a midterm. President Obama had incredible support, right, going in, and then in the midterms during his presidency, his party, got whacked in 2010 after that. So I think we're going to test that proposition here, but I have every reason to believe that the 40% or so folks that identify so strongly with President Trump will be out to vote.
Eric, is this one of those situations where you have a president who is very popular, not necessarily because, like Barack Obama, a lot of people liked him, not necessarily because he was a Democrat, but they didn't show up, during the midterm elections? Could we see that same thing with Donald Trump? A lot of his people like him, but it's more because he's Donald Trump. And if you believe Bob Woodward or the anonymous New York Times op-ed, he's really not a Republican.
Even leaving Woodward and the op-ed out of it, a lot of the Trump base was people who were not traditional voters. He turned out, much as Barack Obama did in 2008, people who had not voted in years registered and turned out for him in 2016. Off-year elections are always lower turnout. Those people who are not habitual voters are harder to bring out. Plus, as Joey pointed out earlier, the president's approval ratings have slid quite a bit from where he was 2 years ago, in part because he's not running against someone, he's being judged on his own. But nonetheless, I think all of those limit the amount, to the degree to which he can affect this election.
Kip, let me ask you. Let's say just looking at the footage in Evansville, fill in the place.
Do I have to again?
Yeah, yes, you do. Hey, even saw some of our mutual friends up there on stage.
I did. One very big surprise. But keep going.
Exactly. Does that have Democrats worried that that here's a president, if you look on the screen there, who can draw this crowd, even though with all the issues that are out there, whether it's the Comey investigations, some people pleading guilty or cutting plea deals left and right. I mean, should Democrats still be worried about the impact the president will have here in Indiana?
Yeah, they should. I mean, it's an unknown. I think both Joey and Eric pointed out the great unknown here. What is going to be the Trump turnout? One thing I can say for sure is Democratic turnout is going to be better than it was in 2010 and better than it was in 2014. So I don't have any doubt that the base of my party is motivated and they're coming out because they want to send a message to Donald Trump. And I think that base has actually expanded some. Even Steve Bannon said that suburban Republican women are gone from the party, and I think they're coming out for us this year. And so the question really is in this election is going to be, will the casual, what's the word I'm looking for?
I should say the passive,
non-traditional voter come out,
Yeah.
come out and vote or not, and that's going to be tested. The other part of that though that I would add is that some of Joey's folks, I believe, who are really disgusted by this president, disgusted by his behavior, disgusted by the drama in the White House on a daily basis, disgusted by his ineffectualness, disgusted by his rhetoric, I think may stay home. It may depress them, and that to me is where the election is going to be decided. What those people do.
Brad, I was having a conversation with some folks up in Hamilton County, which we all know Republicans need definitely to win any sort of statewide by a lot, any sort of statewide race, and the enthusiasm and energy just wasn't there. And I was also reminded that Donald Trump was actually the low performing voter in Hamilton County in 2016. Like the county auditor got more votes than he did. So if you're a Republican, should you be worried?
Well, there's a lot of bright people in Hamilton County. This is going to be an interesting year. I mean, Joey referenced 2010. The difference between 2010 and 2018, when Obama was elected in 08, the economy went into the crapper.
Right.
And this time around, Trump gets elected in 16, and the economy starts to soar.
Oh, wait a minute. The economy did what it's continued to do for the last 6-7 years. It didn't soar.
It soared.
No, it did not.
But you were saying.
Thanks, Brad.
Kip's hangry.
Get him a Snickers bar.
But I'm right.
But yes, the Republicans need a big win in Hamilton County. They have a problem where there's two factions in Hamilton County, and they hate each other. And how that affects turnout, I'm not sure. But yeah, there's not this juice out there where you don't have a Donald Trump on the ballot. And as much as he tries to make it about himself, he's good at being a survivor, and when he's attacked, that his supporters will turn out for him. But I don't think that filters down the ballot all that much.
It's the Lugar Republican problem.
Right.
Yeah, you did exactly what I was about to say. I mean, we've been throwing around election years. Think about 2012 when Joe Donnelly won this seat for the first time.
Excellent point.
Richard Murdoch won Hamilton County. I believe he won all the donut counties, but by a lot smaller margins than a Republican needs to come out of there with.
The conventional wisdom, you need at least 60% in the donut counties to offset Marion and Lake. When Dan Coates ran, I want to say in 2010, he got about 65% of the vote. Mike Pence was 60, and Richard Murdoch was right at about 55, which was not enough to get over the finish line.
Not going to do it. And the difference is you had Richard Murdoch depressing turnout by himself in 2012. The question is, does Donald Trump depress some of those suburban women or suburban voters in 2018?
Let me ask you this, Kip. How does that impact, do you think, maybe some of those down the ballot races? You've got a couple, two African-American women, one running in the 5th district, another one in the 6th for Congress. You've got races like Mike Delph and J.D. Ford in sort of the northwest corner of Indianapolis. How do you think all that plays out?
I actually think at the legislative level is going to be where the most interest lies, or where it's going to be most fascinating. I think there's races out there that people aren't looking at right now that could be a big surprise to folks. Derek Camp versus Jim Merritt, as an example, the state Senate race that's really under a lot of people's radar screen. But I think that district, Hillary Clinton lost by 2 percentage points. As a state Senate district. I think that one's ripe for a turnover. Derek Camp's a very good candidate. He's working really hard.
It also keeps Jim from running for mayor.
And Merritt is spending all his time worried about running for mayor and not looking at that race. So I think that could be a problem for
I
Jim
disagree
Merritt.
with that, Kip. He's working his tail off in that district as he has for years, serving the constituents of that district.
But the point being that I think that the congressional level is going to be interesting. I think the biggest chances for pickup for Democrats are Liz Watson and the race up in the South Bend area. Mel Hall. Yeah, name wouldn't come to me. I'm sorry. Those are the two biggest chances.
Well, that tells us a lot.
Well, I don't live up there. I'm not seeing the commercials, and I'm getting old and hangry.
Before we move on, gentlemen,
I've written him a check. Dang it, I should remember his name.
I want to get you gentlemen's opinions on a couple things in the Trump administration this week. We saw, obviously, the Bob Woodward book Fear be debuted, and also the anonymous op-ed submitted to New York Times. Eric, let me start with you. Are we at a weird point where things are in such a place in the White House that anonymous op-eds are now making the quote-unquote paper of record?
There's a question over whether that's a weird point. Yeah, this is unprecedented. I mean, okay, let's try and reach for a precedent. A lot of people have pointed out the article in Foreign Affairs back in the 1940s, written by X, warning of the danger of the Soviet Union and calling for what turned into the Cold War. That turned out to be George Kennan, one of the top diplomats at the time and for the next 2 decades. That's like the closest analog I can come up with. And that is in a niche policy journal, not the paper of record. It is not someone saying, I'm actively resisting my administration from within. There's no question this is without precedent.
Joe, is this any way to run a government? Because I think sometimes what the bigger issue is, I mean, a lot of my colleagues in the chatter class have gone to this person should resign, yelling treason, et cetera, but you got a situation where it looks like people in the White House don't trust each other. And as somebody who's worked in government,
looks like
yeah,
they don't. No, it is no way to run a government. And to the op-ed specifically, first of all, the New York Times, I think this person will be outed at some point. The New York Times had better be sure that it is truly a very senior official for them to go to the links to publish this anonymously. I also think that it is, we elect in the United States, we elect a chief executive, and like him, hate him, whatever, he is elected by the people of the country to run the country. To have staff running around subverting direct orders of the president, for which he would later be held accountable for the voters, I think is a real problem in a chain of command structure like the United States government. We can't. We have a leader. He's fairly elected. We got to.
I agree. I agree with most of that.
but
here's the thing. Trump hired these people, so it's a direct reflection of Donald Trump that he's got a bunch of people underneath him who are sabotaging him. I mean, it just shows the incredible dysfunction there is. One, he couldn't figure out to hire people that would be loyal and do what he asked. That's a pretty damning thing in and of itself. And then you have the specter of this person coming out there doing that. And I think it would have been much more effective had this person got his 8 people or 50 people or how many there are with him, walked out of the White House, asked the press to do a press conference, said, we are quitting today. That, to me, would have been a much more effective thing to stop Donald Trump from what he's doing, because it might have caused Congress to get off their butts and do something about this. I mean, this is the most dysfunction any of us have ever seen in a White House in our entire lives, and that includes Nixon.
But Brad, the question is, there's this theory out there that Donald Trump thrives on chaos, and is this
but the country doesn't.
He does. Yeah. Joey's right. It's not good for the country. Kip's right. This is a lot of chaos. Trump thrives on this. He seems to survive it. But at this point, yeah, why not Trump just do it himself? I mean, certainly there are some people who are loyal to him in the White House. But yeah, now you don't know who they are. They don't know who's part of the cabal. If it's a cabal, is this one person? found it interesting, the Jimmy Kimmel theory on Lodestar. You know,
I missed that.
So Kimmel basically, they went through the word Lodestar was
Right.
in there to describe Donald Trump, and they went back and found that Mike Pence
Right, I saw that.
uses
I didn't know
Lodestar as a.
I don't think it was Pence.
Fairly regularly. What now? I don't know if this is a correlation or not,
Well,
but the Antelope Club's had a run on Lone Star this week.
Nice. You got that in there.
Well done.
Here's the thing. I mean, no one's brought up the I word yet, but if you're talking about a constitutional crisis, as other people have pointed out, there are constitutional remedies. If you think there's a problem, then you've got either impeachment or the 25th Amendment. When we've had impeachments previously, you were in Illinois during the Rod Blagojevich years. That was a unanimous vote to remove him. Eric Greitens in Missouri earlier this year, that was an overwhelming bipartisan effort. You do not have that in the case of President Trump. What you have in this case is people who are writing op-eds saying that saying in essence this is the appropriate remedy, but not actually acting on it. It's all staying in this sub rosa form. And that, again, is without precedent and not the way the system's drawn up.
You're watching Indiana Issues, the online public affairs program. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. Our guest today, Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Kip Tew, Eric Berman, WIBC Radio, and Joey Fox, Republican. Gentlemen, Brett Kavanaugh finished up his testimony before the Senate this week. Democrats had called for a delay, saying they hadn't seen all the documents. Several protesters sort of escorted out of the building. Like I said, it's not your father's Senate Judiciary Committee hearings.
Mothers.
Your mothers or grandmothers, for that matter. Eric, let me start with you. Any of this matter, Mr. Kavanaugh, be confirmed?
He'll be confirmed. Unless there's something much more explosive than what has come out to this point, he'll be confirmed.
Yep. Mr. Kavanaugh, Judge Kavanaugh got criticized for, some people saying not answering questions. I mean, the way these hearings have just gone on, as far as I can recall watching them since I was in college, it is very rare that somebody's going to say, yes, I thought this was rightfully decided, this was wrongfully decided.
Yeah, well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg did that on abortion, which was fairly unprecedented. Yes, I'll say that. The problem here, I think, is that Kavanaugh has committed perjury a couple of times, and the question is whether the Democrats will be able to use those him lying under oath as a way to stop it. I'm afraid Eric's right. He's also, in the last couple of days, uncovered some of the documents where he's basically said, yeah, I would overturn Roe v. Wade. He doesn't say that, but he comes as close as he can
he did
to saying
not.
that.
He was making an analysis
The entire
of legal
reason,
scholarship.
Here's the
he
thing.
did not give his opinion at all.
Here's the thing that drives me absolutely nuts. You know, and I know, he's not been nominated for a Supreme Court position because he supports Roe v. Wade, because the base of the Republican Party wants somebody on the Supreme Court that wants to overturn Roe v. Wade. You know it. I know it. Everybody else knows it. We're dancing around it. That is true. If he gets on there, he's going to overturn Roe v. Wade. There's no doubt. But you guys keep trying to hide the ball on that, and I don't understand why, other than you don't want to have Susan Collins, I suppose, potentially put in a box on what her vote's going to be. He's going to vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. He's given every signal possible that that's going to happen.
We are trying to put a justice on the Supreme Court that will follow the Constitution and apply the law as written and intended by the legislature.
You could have done that with Merrick Garland.
Well, he didn't get a hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so now here we are.
Brad, is this why people hate politics?
Absolutely. That's why the Libertarian Party's growing, and the other two are shrinking dramatically.
We didn't get to talk about Senator Spartacus.
What these hearings have shown is, why even bother with the hearings anymore? I mean, this suddenly makes the Trump White House look functional. And I think Kavanaugh does get approved, but these hearings have just been a disaster. And at this point, why not just give all the data to everybody and say, all right, we're going to vote thumbs up or thumbs down? Because going through a week's worth of grandstanding, I don't think serves the process at all, and it certainly doesn't serve the public.
You're watching Indiana Issues. Our guests today, Brad Klopfenstein, Kip Tew, Eric Berman, and Joey Fox. So we got about 5 minutes left and some change here. Mike Braun, Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, launched his, what he called his statewide solutions tour this week, saying he wants to talk about, shares ideas for health care, job creation, immigration, planning to draw up contrast with Joe Donnelly. Already we've seen some of the commercials pop up, the Republicans going after Joe Donnelly, calling him Mexico Joe, Democrats going after Mike Braun, saying his company uses parts from China. Eric, let me start with you. Last time I checked, we're in a global economy. Everything comes from everywhere.
Indeed. And it's fascinating the way they've both made made that charge against each other. Well, you're dealing with foreign companies. I've talked to both of these gentlemen over the last couple of weeks. I asked them about that. Both of them have, well, this is what distinguishes my situation from the other guy. What I did is perfectly normal and part of a global economy, but that other guy, voters will judge it.
Yep. Will that really matter that Joe Donnelly's company did business in Mexico, that Mike Braun, had parts from China? I mean, like I said, this is the 21st century. Everything comes from everywhere these days.
Well, I think from a tactical standpoint, I believe that the Donnelly campaign went after Mike Braun first because they knew the attack was coming on them, and so they were inoculating themselves. And I think they've successfully muddied the waters on that issue entirely, so that it's not going to be held against Joe Donnelly. I thought that was very good from a political tactician's standpoint. So the Mexico Joe thing doesn't stick, and I think it's not sticking. I think the campaign in the end is going to come down to something other than that.
Joey, one of the big criticisms of both candidates to a certain degree is that we haven't had, 60 days out, any real issue vetting discussion. What do you do for health care? What do you do on the immigration issue? There hasn't really been that discussion. We're just going to have to wait until the debates in October.
Well, and even the debates, you're not going to get any level of detail, right, on what they're doing. This is why
there was that one back in April I thought was pretty interesting.
Did you?
I wonder who the host was. Did you ever follow that?
It's all about the
It's not
moderator.
coming to
It's
mind
really
right
the moderator.
now, but it was an
Moderator
issue.
makes the debate. That's true. So no, I think that I disagree with your question a little bit in that I think that it's fairly clear where these guys are on some of these issues, right? I mean, and the contrasts are fairly distinct. Mike Braun wants to repeal and replace Obamacare. Senator Donnelly says, "Hey, that's going to have negative effects here. I'm not for that." Mike Braun says, "Right, we want to build the wall." And then I think while Donnelly is willing to engage in that conversation, Mike Braun's much more of a hardliner on immigration, and I don't think that's going to be. That one's not hard to judge. If you want a candidate who's going to be harder line on immigration, you're probably going to vote for Mike Braun. So I think there are issues out there. I just don't think we're getting into them deep.
Brad, before we wind down here, going back to some of the polling that we saw earlier, the three-way poll, Lucy Britton was about 8%, and even in the polls that didn't include her, we're talking about 15 to 20% of the electorate still undecided out there. What does a Libertarian need to do to capture some of that?
Certainly, Lucy needs to do well in the debates again like she did 2 years ago. That's going to make a big difference. Right now, I don't think Braun or Donnelly have done a very good job of separating themselves from each other. And unless somebody throws out a Swamp Brothers ad like he did in the spring, or if somebody has a major gaffe in one of the debates, I think it's going to be hard for them to really engage with voters. Right now, everybody's kind of tuning out Mexico Joe or where Mike Braun gets his parts. I don't think that that's going to be a big deciding factor in this race. If Lucy can get a little bit of money or maybe get somebody who's behind her a little bit, she might be able to make some traction and really sway this one way or the other. But right now, I would call it a toss-up.
Gentlemen, we're in our last segment, so we've got to go around the table real quickly. Any sort of predictions or political prognostications? Joy, we'll start with you. What should we be paying attention to?
The Kavanaugh vote. I'm still the same from like a month ago when I was on the show. It's the Kavanaugh vote. What Donnelly does, I think, portends a lot for the future.
Eric?
We've thrown around a lot of numbers on this program. The big number to watch is the Trump favorable, unfavorable in Indiana. If he's still at 44% or higher disapprove, Joe Donnelly gets reelected.
Kip?
I can't top that. I think he's right about that.
Right.
I kind of agree with Eric. I mean, yeah, Trump obviously was huge in Indiana, not so huge anymore. So he's got to have to somehow get back into showing that he's a leader.
Look for the Fraternal Order Police to offer up an endorsement for Joe Donnelly, once again throwing another monkey wrench into this U.S. Senate race. I only said that because I just got the news release about 10 minutes ago. So see it right there. Hey, we do what we can. Our guests today have been Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Kip Tew, Eric Berman, WIBC Radio, Joey Fox, Republican. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for being with us. Always good to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you all for joining us. Good to have you here. And special thanks again to our friends here at Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. You've been watching Indiana Issues, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks here on Indiana Issues.
Very sweet, gentlemen.